Hello everyone, my name is Holger and this is the first update to my 6-part video series that previews the upcoming Season 2 of the Wheel of Time TV show. If you have not watched the earlier videos, then I strongly recommend you do so first. The link to the playlist should be at the top of your screen. Since the last part of the video series, a lot of new information has become available, so in this update I will look at that information and see how it fits into the predictions I made earlier. Spoiler warning. This video does contain spoilers. I recommend that before watching this video you watch the first season of the TV show and read all of the books first, up until book 14, A Memory of Light, plus the prequel New Spring, in order to avoid having your reading enjoyment spoiled. I'm going to look at the following pieces of new information. A video released by Amazon during JordanCon, in which Rafe Judkins, the showrunner, talks about a particular filming set that was used during Season 2 filming, and the scenes filmed on that set. A casting announcement for Verin, along with a brief video clip and some secondary information about Verin's appearance in Season 2. The announcement of the September 1st release date, and 8 photos that were released along with that announcement by Entertainment Weekly, and also later by Amazon on Twitter. For those photos we also have episode numbers. Another set of 4 photos that Amazon released 3 weeks later on June 14th. And 2 photos that were originally released at New York Comic Con 2022 and for which we now have episode numbers. I'll go through the information mostly by episode number, so let's start with episode 1 and a photo of Matt. There is not much additional information here, other than the confirmation that Matt will be in episode 1, which we already assumed. The more interesting photo for episode 1 is this photo of Egwene, apparently in the White Tower kitchen doing chores. This is significant because it places Egwene in the White Tower a bit earlier than I expected. It looks like she will probably arrive in the tower by mid-episode 1 for her to have enough time for introductions and to then do chores. Also note the stone arch we see on the right side of that photo, which I will get back to in a moment. Next we have a video clip of Verin shown on the British TV station BBC as part of the coverage of the BAFTA Awards. It is a very brief clip, but we can clearly see that Verin is in Valon here. The lights, decorative lanterns, and shape of the awnings of the buildings are all a precise match to what we see in the scene when Rand and Matt arrive in Valon in episode 5 of season 1. Also from the way the scene was shot, it very much looks like this is the first time we see Verin in the show, with a spotlight on her face and hair, while Verin lowers the hood of her cloak. Having Verin in the tower is different from what I expected, but before looking at that in more detail, let's first check if we can pinpoint the episode number in which the scene will be shown. There is a way to somewhat narrow this down. For that we need to look at another shot. This picture is part of a selfie that one of the actors on the show posted on Twitter, and in which she inadvertently included a series of headshots in the photo that show a part of the Season 3 cast. The photo was shot through a mirror, so we need to flip it in order to make sense of the photos. Many of the photos seen here are characters that we have already seen on the show, and some other photos have been identified by various fans, mostly on Discord servers. The most important aspect of this set of photos is the order in which photos are shown. They appear to be ordered by cast number, with photos grouped together 9 photos at a time on separate sheets of paper, and on each sheet ordered top to bottom, left to right. Cast numbers are numbers assigned to the characters in the show, and we have some information on how they were assigned. Here's a partial list of some of the cast numbers we know coming from different sources. Apparently the first 7 cast numbers were assigned to the show leads, and after that cast numbers were assigned approximately in the order in which characters first appeared in the original scripts. This means characters who first appeared in a later episode have a higher cast number. The interesting part here is the cast number of Mira Sayal playing Verin relative to other cast numbers, most importantly relative to Kira Coveney, who plays Elaine on the show. As we can see, Verin appears ahead of Elaine, which suggests that in the original script, Verin probably had her first scene before Elaine. That does not necessarily mean that this will also be true in the actual show, because this can change due to editing, but at least it gives us an idea in which episode we can expect to first see Verin. For Elaine, we know that we will see a scene between Elaine and Egwene in which Elaine helps Egwene get settled in the tower, similar to what happens in the books. That scene was shown at New York Comic Con 2022 exclusively to the attendants of the convention and has not been released to the general public yet. Since we know that Egwene will already do chores in the tower in episode 1, The scene with Elaine will probably also take place in episode 1 or at the latest in episode 2. Based on that, we should also see Verin arrive in the tower in either episode 1 or 2. This of course throws off one of my predictions, and that is that Moraine would see Verin somewhere in the countryside during season 2. That prediction was based on the assumption that the show would merge Verin with Adelias and Vendine, which is apparently not the case. So Adelias and or Vendine may be in the show as separate characters, and Moraine will not go and see Verin during season 2. As for what Verin's story arc will be, right now we really have no information on that. I imagine that Verin could be paired up with Alanna, mostly because in the books both Verin and Alanna later in book 4 show up in the Two Rivers. If the show wants to adapt that part of the story, then the writers would have to find a way to get both of them into the Two Rivers by early season 3. One easy way to do this is to have them join the main group in Cairhien in season 2, and from there go to Falme, and then join Perrin and Matt on their way to the Two Rivers in early season 3. For Alanna, we already know that she filmed action sequences in season 2 from a statement she made in the JordanCon video, and also from earlier statements by Emmanuel Imani, who plays Ivan in the show, which I talked about in an earlier video. This suggests that Alanna and her warders probably did not spend all of season 2 in the tower. If Verin joins Alanna in season 2 on her trip to Cairhien, then she could also provide Rand with information on how to use portal stones, just like in the books. So let's move on from Verin to the next item, which is another photo from Entertainment Weekly, this one showing Lan in episode 3. The horse he's riding is definitely Mandarb. This means Lan must have retrieved his horse, and probably Moraine's as well, early in season 2, because both horses were left behind in Tar Valon in season 1, at the end of episode 6. This seems to confirm that Moraine and Lan go to Tar Valon early in season 2, probably also to drop off the girls at the tower, as I had predicted. Next we have another photo from episode 3, showing Nynaeve, but before we look at that, for context, we first need to look at 2 brief video clips from the JordanCon video, in which Rafe and Sarah Nakamura discuss the set on which the JordanCon video was filmed and how it was used.
I'm here on a set that features quite heavily in season 2. A scene that looked really effortless in the final cuts. I think it looked effortless in the final cuts, but was hard to film. We actually did a couple scenes in this room that were incredibly difficult to film. A lot of resets, blood, visual effects, water, resetting of costume, unsetting of costume, change of costume. It was massive, and it all took place in here. You'll see it in season 2. And it's a little bit in season 3 as well, so you might be able to tell what it is from what's behind me. I don't know.
Not to be too redundant and not to copy Rafe too much, but there are some moments that happen within the room that we're sitting in that are so incredibly powerful and rip me to shreds, and I'm really, really excited for fans to see it.
Immediately after the video had been released, most fans speculated that the room in which the video was shot is the tower chamber in which accepted tests take place. The description of the scene includes blood, which would likely be from injuries during the tests. Also, water and costume changes would be necessary in between the 3 phases of the tests, because the persons being tested have water poured over them to symbolically cleanse them of any wrongdoing committed by them or against them during the tests. It is interesting that Rafe talks about a couple of such scenes being filmed and shown in season 2, which suggests that 2 of the girls will have their accepted tests. More about that in a moment. Now let's look at that photo from episode 3 showing Nynaeve that I mentioned earlier. We can see that the lighting and the shape of the column in the picture matches that from the JordanCon video, so Nynaeve is clearly in the same room. By the state of her dress and the look on her face, it seems that she's just about to start her accepted test, so this confirms that Nynaeve is one of the 2 girls who will have her accepted test in season 2. Nynaeve being raised to accepted in season 2 has been one of my predictions, and I expected this to happen in episode 3 or 4. Looks like episode 3 is correct. The remaining question is, who is the other girl who is tested? To answer that question, we need to look at another photo that was released recently. This one was not part of the Entertainment Weekly photos, but part of a later release, so we don't have an episode number for it. However, a very similar photo showing only Elaine was released at New York Comic Con 2022, and for that photo, WoT Series has identified that it belongs to episode 4. It is clearly from the same scene, in the same location, so the photo showing all 3 girls must also be from episode 4. Since all 3 girls are dressed for traveling, with 2 of them even wearing backpacks. This must be part of the plot arc in which Egwene is eventually taken to Falme and then enslaved as a Damani. I expected that event to start in episode 3 and then conclude in episode 4 as the mid-season event. Now it looks like it will start a little bit later, probably in early episode 4. From the suspicious looking and almost hostile look on their faces, we can speculate that they may be facing Liandrin in that scene. The arch in the photo looks very similar to the arch that we saw earlier in the photo with Egwene doing chores, so it looks like this is probably a location in or near the tower, and not in the Ways or Falme or any other place. The most interesting part is how they are dressed. Nynaeve wears her accepted dress and cloak, whereas Egwene and Elaine are still in their novice dresses and cloaks. This has been confirmed by one of the Amazon costume designers in a tweet, and it helps us answer the question who the other girl is who has her accepted test in Season 2. If this really is the scene that leads to Egwene going to the Cairhien, then it could not be Egwene who has her accepted test in Season 2, because in this scene she is still a novice, and after that scene she will be in Falme for the remainder of the season, so she will not have any chance to take the test. This means the other girl has to be Elaine, and since Elaine is also still a novice in the scene, this means that she cannot go to Falme along with Egwene. She has to stay behind and then take the test later in the season. And if Elaine stays behind, then Nynaeve likely stays behind as well, because it would not make much sense for Nynaeve to be in Falme on her own, with nobody to talk to. It would be very difficult for the show to narrate her story that way. This very much looks like an indirect confirmation of one of my key predictions for Season 2, one which has been somewhat controversial among fans, and that is that only Egwene is taken to Falme by Liandrin, not the other girls. I expect that the overall plot arc will play out somewhat like this. Liandrin tells Egwene and only Egwene that she needs to go with her for some made-up reason. That reason could, for example, be to help Rand, just like in the books, but there could also be a different reason. Egwene tells Nynaeve and Elaine about that, and Nynaeve warns Egwene not to go, since Nynaeve is highly suspicious of Liandrin, and has previously called her a snake in Season 1, Episode 4. Since Egwene is a novice and cannot refuse Liandrin's order, Nynaeve and Elaine then decide to accompany Egwene. All of them show up and confront Liandrin, who is not happy about that and only wants to take Egwene. Liandrin finds a way to separate Egwene from the others, probably by attacking them in some form, and then escapes with Egwene. The girls likely do not expect any kind of attack, because at this time they are not aware that the Black Archer exists, and that it is possible for any Aes Sedai to use the One Power as a weapon in this manner. After this attack, Nynaeve and Elaine talk to one of the Aes Sedai leaders in the tower, probably Swan, who fills them in on the Black Archer, and this is how the Black Archer hunt starts. I mentioned in one of my earlier videos that there is evidence in Season 1 that Swan likely already knew during the events of Season 1 that Liandrin was black. The remaining item here is when Elaine has her accepted test. This has to happen after Egwene is taken, but before the group heads to Cairhien. This means probably in episode 4 or 5, which is now a new prediction I'm making. For only Nynaeve and Elaine to take their accepted tests but not Egwene makes a lot of sense for their character arcs. Egwene does not need to be raised to accept it, but can be raised straight to Amerlin in Salidar based on Tarot law. Egwene can still pretend to be full Aes Sedai before that. She just has to claim that her Aes Sedai ring was taken by the Cairhien while she was enslaved there. For Nynaeve and Elaine, it is more important to be raised to accept it, not just to make it possible to impersonate Aes Sedai and Tenchiko, but also because that makes it more plausible that Egwene can later raise both of them to full Aes Sedai in Salidar. Next, let's look at some new information regarding the timeline of events in Cairhien, where we now have information suggesting that the Cairhien events may start as early as episode 4. I had previously predicted that Moraine and her group will head to Cairhien in episode 5, and that the events in Cairhien will take place during episodes 6 and 7. This prediction was based mostly on a report by WoT Series that a Sun Palace servant had been cast and was likely filming for episode 7 or 8. To be fair though, WoT Series did state that it was possible that this was pickup shooting for a different episode, and that actually seems to be the case now, because it is unlikely that the Cairhien events will go all the way from episode 4 through 7. Disregarding that Sun Palace servant information, here's the latest information we have on the timing of the events in Cairhien. This Entertainment Weekly photo of Moraine in the foregate of Cairhien is from episode 4, and it is the earliest point in time we have for the events in Cairhien. And then we have this photo of Matt. The photo was originally released at New York Comic Con 2022, and WoT Series has now confirmed that this is from episode 6. Even though the background is rather blurry, we can see similarities to a location shown in the Geeky Era's Season 2 location video. This is the Barrandov Studios backlot, which is used for the Cairhien inner city, and we can compare the stonework on the first floor, the vertical wooden beams on the second floor, and the differently shaped signs hanging off the building walls. So it very much looks like Matt is in Cairhien in episode 6. So with the Cairhien events beginning no later than episode 4 and ending no earlier than episode 6, we can now attempt to come up with a timeline. In episode 4 we may get some events in the Foregate. One possibility is that this is part of Moiraine's research mission. This means she might meet Adelias and Vendine here, or anyone else she sees on her research trip. In episode 5 we will probably see Balthanus Manor and possibly some fighting, although all of that could also start in episode 4. There might also be a time jump here, more about that later. I also expect episode 5 to be the episode in which Nynaeve, Elaine, Matt and others come to Cairhien and join Rand, Lan and Moiraine. Episode 6 will be the big showdown in the Sun Palace with the redstone door frame and possibly also more scenes in the Foregate, potentially including Matt and Aludra. We have seen several clips from the Foregate. 2 of them were official releases showing explosions. And there were several others with different people working through the Foregate. We don't know when most of these events will happen, but my guess is either episode 4 when we have seen Moiraine in the Foregate, or perhaps more likely for some of them during episode 6 combined with the events related to Aludra. We also don't know exactly when the group will travel to Falme, but this would have to be either late in episode 6 or early in episode 7, similar to how season 1 handled traveling from Valon to Fadera. With Moiraine's group now being in Cairhien earlier than expected, the question is when those events will happen that I previously thought would happen during her travels. There are 3 such events. First, there is Rand's sword training by Lan. This will probably happen around the time when Moiraine is engaged with the events at Balthanus Manor. This means in episode 5, possibly also during a potential time jump during the same episode. Next, there is Daniel Henney's 2 swords comment, which suggests that Rand and Lan fight together. This could happen around the same time. This means during or after their training. Finally, there are the scenes in which Moiraine is attacked by a Fade. This may happen on her trip to Balthanus Manor if she goes there alone. It could also happen later in the season after the Cairhien events, when Moiraine and Lan head back to Tarvalon, if Moiraine and Lan somehow get separated during the trip. Leaving the events in the Eastern Randlands for now, let's look at what happens in episode 5 in Falme. We have a picture from episode 5 that shows a group of Seanchan leaders, together with Ishamael and surprisingly Loial. It looks like the writers are associating Ishamael with the Seanchan relatively early, probably to make it easier to justify why he shows up later to fight Rand. Beyond that, we really don't have any information suggesting why he is in Falme at this early point. Loial's presence in this photo is more interesting. He appears to be dressed in servant's clothing, the same clothing that he wears in a fight scene we saw in an earlier video. That fight scene appears to take place in the same location where we expect the Heroes of the Horn battle to happen later, so it is probably from one of the later episodes. This means episode 7 or 8. We have another photo of Loial, apparently from the attempt by Perrin's group to break out of imprisonment, and here he appears to wear different clothing, so it looks like the change in clothing and the photo with him serving the Seanchan is set after the breakout attempt. This means what likely happened is Perrin's group was imprisoned, then tried to break out. Several members of Perrin's group were able to break out, but Loial apparently was not, or he was quickly recaptured, possibly shown in that picture with Loial having ropes around his body. After that, the Seanchan somehow convinced or coerced Loial to serve them. Next, let's jump forward to episode 8. We have a picture of Rand in front of the same background that we saw in one of the earlier videos, where we believe that one of the people in the picture may be Turok. So it looks like Rand is getting ready to confront Turok here. We also have a picture of Perrin from episode 8. The most interesting part here is the presence of Masema in the picture, wearing Seanchan armor. This supports my prediction in one of the earlier videos that the Seanchan stripped most of the members of Perrin's group of their armor during the earlier lineup, and several of them were kept in their underwear after that, and also fought in their underwear to free themselves. After that, Masema probably took Seanchan armor off a dead Seanchan soldier and started wearing it, since Masema no longer had his own Shinaren armor. Finally, one of the most interesting photos to have been released recently is this photo of Matt holding what appears to be a quarterstaff. This photo was not part of the Entertainment Weekly photo set, so we do not have an episode number for it. However, the flat-roofed buildings in the back suggest that it is set in Falme, so it is probably from late in the season, most likely episode 7 or 8. What makes this photo so interesting is that there appears to be a bird carved into the staff, possibly a raven, which seems likely since ravens are the only species of birds that have a special meaning for Matt. There may even be a second raven carved into the staff, near the top of the staff on an oval-shaped raised section that almost looks like a plaque. This one is harder to recognize, but I think we may be seeing the back of the raven's head, the body bulging outward, and what might be feathers near the bottom. This begs the question how Matt came into the possession of such a staff. Ravens are associated with the Dark One in the Randlands, so it seems unlikely that anyone would carve a raven into a quarterstaff. Among the Seanchan, ravens are a symbol of the royal family, and it is prohibited to use their image in a different context, so it also seems unlikely that Matt would get such a staff from the Seanchan, unless he just happened to fight a member of the Seanchan royal family who carried such a staff, which seems like quite a stretch. In the books, the Ashandarai Matt received from the Finn has writing on its side, with ravens carved into the staff on both ends of the writing. I think the weapon we see in Matt's hands here may be the weapon he gets from the Finn, and the raven we see at the top may be one of those two ravens carved into it, with writing on the side of the staff tilted away from the camera. There should be another raven at the bottom then, off camera. So if this is true, is this an Ashandarai instead of a quarterstaff? Possibly, but the wood seems too thick for that, and the staff would probably be a bit too long, with a blade on its end, if the wooden part itself is already at least 6 feet long. I think it is more likely that this is just a regular quarterstaff. In that case, why would the writers have the Finn give Matt a quarterstaff instead of an Ashandarai? I can only speculate, but my guess is that this may be because of the Gawain-Galad fight. In the books, Matt uses a quarterstaff in the first 4 books, which includes the Gawain-Galad fight, until he gets his Ashandarai in Shadow Rising. In the show, the Gawain-Galad fight probably won't happen until season 3 or 4, and by that time Matt has most likely already had his encounter with the Finn. If the Finn were to give him an Ashandarai, then he would have to change his weapon to a quarterstaff just for the Gawain-Galad fight, for that encounter to make sense, and then back to an Ashandarai, which seems difficult to motivate. I think the reason for giving Matt a quarterstaff is so he can use a single weapon throughout the whole series, in all fights, to create more consistency. I also detect a general motive here. It looks like every one of the main characters may be getting a special personal item to use throughout the series, which would make a lot of sense for marketing, merchandising, and cosplay. Matt's weapon may be the quarterstaff. Rand's weapon is his heron-marked blade, and my guess is that he will keep that weapon throughout the series. This means that it does not get destroyed in the Ishamael fight. He's also shown holding that weapon on the cover of the new release of The Great Hunt. Nynaeve's special item is probably her leather belt with its herb pouches, which we see in the Season 2 rap video where she still wears her novice dress, and then again in the photo where she wears her accepted dress. Perrin's special item will likely be an axe, possibly one he gets from one of the White Cloaks, perhaps the one shown in one of the earlier Season 2 preview videos, who might be Childbuyer. And in some later season, that weapon may then switch to a hammer. We don't know what special item Egwene will get. My guess is that it will be something she receives from the Aiel, probably in Season 3. So much about all of the new material. Now a few more topics before I wrap up. First, I previously made suggestions which episodes would focus on which characters. With the new information, I think that this will change a bit. The focus for episodes 3 and 4 will likely be reversed, with episode 3 focusing on Nynaeve based on her accepted test, and episode 4 focusing on Egwene when she is taken to the Seanchan. Similarly, I think the focus for episodes 5 and 6 will also be reversed, with episode 5 focusing on Moraine and her visit at Barthanes Manor, and episode 6 focusing on Matt and his encounter with the Finn and possibly Aludra. There have been several rumors recently about episode titles, originally based on episode titles that someone apparently uploaded to IMDb, which were almost definitely completely fake, and more recently based on titles that were officially uploaded to the WGA website along with episode scripts. I do think that those titles were legitimate in the sense that they did actually come from Amazon, but I do not think that those will be the actual episode titles upon release. I think they were just placeholders that Rafe's team put on the front pages of the scripts to ensure that if photographs of scripts lying around somewhere were accidentally released to the public, the actual titles would not leak. We know that such leaks have happened at least twice over the last few years, and Amazon appears to have learned from that. I think this is no different than Amazon trying to disguise the plot of Season 2 with phrases like Rand hiding in the cosmopolitan city of Falmer, which was almost certainly a deliberate change by Amazon to reduce the exposure from leaks. Because of that, I'm not going to participate in any games trying to assign those episode titles to episode numbers. Then there's the Liandrin chase scene from the cold open of Season 1, Episode 1. I've been predicting that we will get an extended version of this in Season 2, with the reveal that Liandrin is black, and that Moraine has known about this since the beginning of Season 1, mostly because we know that cast and crew went back to the same location for Season 2 shooting. That prediction still seems likely, but Geeky Ari recently revealed in her new Season 2 Block 1 and 2 video that cast and crew even did nighttime shooting in that location. That makes me wonder if we get even more information about that scene than I expected, and perhaps if the background story is deeper than I thought. For example, like this. Perhaps before that scene, Moraine had already suspected that Liandrin is black, and wanted to verify her suspicion by setting a trap for Liandrin. Imagine Moraine arrived first, and then fed information to the Red Arja that a Chandler with the right birthday range to be the dragon lives in the area. Moraine then waits for Liandrin to arrive and follows her to see if she would actually try to gentle the man in violation of the Third Oath, so Moraine could then be sure that Liandrin really was black. There's no evidence of that kind of a backstory, but it is an interesting possibility, and it would certainly fit well into the overall theme of Season 1, where Moraine successfully manipulated many events around her, including the Loghain Tower trial and even her own Oath of Exile, as I explained in an earlier video. Finally, I'd like to talk a little about time jumps. Marcus Rutherford, the actor playing Perrin Ibarra, recently gave an interview to a local publication in his hometown in which he used the phrase time jump in connection with Season 2, which has a lot of people thinking that there may be a time jump at the beginning of Season 2. I do not believe so, and I think Marcus's comment was misinterpreted, so I'm going to first talk a little about time jumps in general and how they might fit into Season 2 before getting back to Marcus's comment. First, let's look at the books. The Great Hunt contains 2 time jumps. One of them is at the beginning, and its purpose is to allow the Lan-Nynaeve relationship to develop, and also to give Rand time to sword train with Lan. Both of these events have to happen before the main part of the book, because Lan and Moraine separate from the others for most of the remainder of the book. The second time jump in the Great Hunt happens during Flicker Flicker. During that event, the group traveling by Portal Stone is stuck in the Portal Stone worlds for several months. The purpose of this time jump is to extend the time that Egwene is enslaved by the Seanchan. Unfortunately, both time jumps were somewhat mishandled by Robert Jordan, because they both contain subtle plot holes or inconsistencies. The problem with the first time jump is the Horn of Valyr. Moraine gives the horn to Agelmar at the end of Book 1, with instructions to have it taken to Ilion. Agelmar is uncomfortable with having the horn in his fortress, so one would think that he would have the horn taken to Ilion as soon as possible. That does not happen though, and no reason is given for that. The horn stays in Agelmar's possession until early in Book 2, when Patton Fane has a chance to steal it. The second time jump has a similar problem. At that point in the book, there are 3 separate storylines. One involves Egwene and the Seanchan, and the second one involves the group traveling by Portal Stone. Both of those are handled correctly. The problem is the third storyline with Nynaeve and Elaine in Falmer. We're supposed to believe that they spent 4 months in Falmer, the full duration of the time jump, in a city controlled by the Seanchan, and during all that time they find no way to free Egwene, but on the day Rand's group arrives in Falmer, they suddenly find a way. That's a coincidence that I find very hard to believe. What this illustrates is just how hard it is to execute time jumps correctly. Rafe himself commented on that in an interview when he was specifically asked about the Portal Stone time jump in Book 2. The question was, since most of the main characters split up geographically at the beginning of the Great Hunt, will the next seasons keep them on parallel timelines for a convergence at Falmer? In which case, the Portal Stones left a time gap of about 4 months for Rand's group. Easier to do on a page or on film? And his answer, time gaps are very difficult moving to the medium of television with the stories intercutting, but we try to do as much as we can to avoid 1-hour cross-continent dragon flights. That last part of Rafe's answer was an obvious reference to the last few seasons of Game of Thrones, where the show started to ignore the realities of traveling across the country, something the show did quite well in early seasons. What Rafe's answer seems to mean overall, though, is that time jumps in the show will likely only happen when absolutely necessary. In Season 1, we had one time jump at the beginning of Episode 5. It was a travel time jump of 1 month, and it was executed correctly. This means all plot lines, including those of side characters, had believable plot arcs without any inconsistencies. So let's look at what events in Season 2 would benefit from time jumps, and when those time jumps could happen. To recap, the books have 3 events that require time jumps: the Lan-Nynaeve relationship, Rand's sword training with Lan, and Egwene's time with the Seanchan. In the show, the Lan-Nynaeve relationship started much earlier in Season 1 and was developed to about the same point as in Book 2 when Lan and Nynaeve separate, so there's no need for a time jump for that in the show. The other 2 events would likely still benefit from time jumps in the show. So when should they happen? Certainly not at the beginning of Season 2, because at that time Lan is not even with Rand, and Egwene is not in Falme yet, so there is no way the show could use time jumps for those purposes at that time. So would it still make sense to have a time jump in the beginning? Probably not. Especially for non-book readers, such a time jump would be very disruptive after a 2-year break. The show needs to find a way to get all viewers back into the story, and the easiest way to do so is by having a longer than usual previously on section at the beginning of Episode 1 to reacquaint everyone with the story and the characters, followed by a few minutes spent in the location where Season 1 left off. This means in Faldera. This also gives the show a chance to explain to non-book readers what the Hunt for the Horn is and why it is necessary. There's a hint in Episode 8 of Season 1 that we probably will go back to Faldera in Season 2, and that comes from the dialogue between Amalisa and Egelmar, where they debate which armor Egelmar should wear for the upcoming fight. That scene neither advances the plot nor the characterization at that time, so it really should have ended up on the cutting room floor, unless there's a follow-up to that scene later in Season 2, which makes that scene important. The follow-up would have to be either that Egelmar died because he picked the wrong armor, or that he survived because he picked the right armor. Probably the latter, because it would be a bit of a waste for the show to invest time into characterizing a person in a season finale episode when that person dies right after. So I expect to see such a follow-up in Season 2, where we will see that Egelmar survived because he made the decision to use his own armor, which has better protection for the center of his chest, where he was hit by the Trolloc spear. For that story to have the most impact, it needs to be told in real time, in Faldera, not in a flashback, and not just by having others talk about it during traveling. After those scenes in Faldera, everyone will leave Faldera, and we will get a travel section with Perrin on the hunt for the Horn, and Moraine, Lan, and the girls traveling to Tarvalon. During that travel section, it is possible to have a short time jump, up to 3 weeks or so, but it is not necessary, and I don't think it is likely. We have seen, for example, in Season 1, Episode 3, that it is easily possible to cover a few weeks of traveling in multiple storylines, simply by cutting back and forth between those storylines. This still leaves us with a problem of what to do about Rand's sword training and Egwene's time with the Seanchan, which might benefit from having a time jump. The best time in the season would likely be in Episode 5, probably in the first half of the episode. For this to work, it is important that all of the storylines are in a state where nothing important happens for at least several weeks, so such a time jump would have to be set up very carefully. The transition between Episodes 4 and 5 could look somewhat like this. Egwene was enslaved in Episode 4 and will remain so in Episode 5, so this part is easy. Perrin was captured by the Seanchan in Episode 4 and will also remain so during the time jump. After we get his escape, Loial is recaptured and then serves the Seanchan. Rand and Lan are in Cairhien, sword training. Moraine probably was at Barthanes Manor in Episode 4 or early Episode 5, sent a message to Alana in the tower asking everyone to come to Cairhien, and is waiting for them to arrive. Elaine had her accepted test in late Episode 4 or early Episode 5, and Nynaeve, Elaine, and Matt are now on the first part of the Black Alger hunt. They will eventually get Moraine's message and then travel to Cairhien. We don't need to see those last parts on screen, assuming nothing important happens on their journey. It would be sufficient for the writers to show us that the group arrives in Cairhien after the time jump. This is one way how a mid-season time jump could work and could help with Egwene's and Rand's storyline, but variations of this are possible, of course. So with all of this in mind, let's go back to what Marcus Rutherford actually said about time jumps. It is important to look at his whole statement in context, not just the one sentence in which he mentions time jumps. Here's the complete quote. In Series 1, the naivety of our characters is at the forefront of the story. But in Season 2, there's a bit of a time jump. They've started to accept and have faith in the prophecy and the destiny, so there's more of a maturity to them. It's darker too, more real and a bit more brutal. The innocence of those kids we find in the village in episode 1 is long gone, and they're becoming a bit more grown up. I'm really excited for people to see it. So in a nutshell, what he's saying is, in Season 1 the Two Rivers 5 behave like teenagers, and in Season 2 they behave like adults. That's all there is to it. This should come as no surprise to book readers, because the same phenomenon also occurs in the books. It is most noticeable for Matt, who in Book 1 pulls pranks by flowering dogs, and in Book 5 leads a military contingent during a war. This means he matures from preteen or young teenager to an adult who is at least in his late 20s, so he jumps forward in his development by at least 10 years, even though the in-story time only progresses by about 2 years. That is the kind of time jump Marcus is talking about. This is not a time jump in which the narrated in-story time jumps forward relative to narration time, but it is a personal development time jump. This means a time jump in which the perceived age and maturity of a character jumps forward relative to in-story time. It has nothing to do with the plot or any events in the show, and Marcus wasn't even talking about events, only about character behavior. This kind of accelerated character maturity is pretty common for stories that have young protagonists, and we should not read anything more into what Marcus said. We're getting to the end of this video. I probably will not release another update before Season 2 airs, unless the upcoming trailers result in such large changes to my predictions that I would have to cover them. I will be at WoTCon next month. Here's what I look like. If you come to WoTCon, please say hello. I always love theorizing with other Wheel of Time fans. And of course, for everyone, enjoy Season 2. I plan to be back with another video sometime after the season has aired, with a retrospective on predictions, some analysis of the season, and more predictions for Season 3. Thanks everyone for watching, I hope you've had fun, and please join me again for other videos on this channel. Also please like, subscribe and leave comments. The description of this video has links for all source material used in the creation of the video. Thanks again, and that's it for now.